This is a dramatized work of fiction. Names, companies, and events are fictional. Imagine signing away the woman you thought had nothing, then learning she would lead an empire. Stay to the end, because this story is about dignity, fatherhood, and the cost of overlooking someone who loved you before success changed you. Subscribe for more stories about consequences and second chances, and tell us whether Ethan deserves a path to change. On the 38th floor of a Manhattan tower, Ethan Crawford lifted a fountain pen and made the most expensive mistake of his life. The pen scratched across the conference room like a judge's gavel. Ethan did not hesitate. His signature swept across a proposed marital settlement with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "There," he said, sliding the folder across the polished walnut table. "As far as I'm concerned, it's over. Only a judge could end the marriage." Ethan was signing a settlement to accompany an uncontested divorce petition. Manhattan shimmered beyond the windows while the room remained unnaturally quiet. Claire Morgan sat opposite him without moving, 7 months pregnant. One hand rested over her belly as their unborn daughter moved. The movement reminded Claire what was ending, and what Ethan did not yet understand he was losing. Ethan leaned back in his Italian leather chair, adjusting the cuff of his tailored charcoal suit. "You don't have to make this difficult." His polished calm had carried him through major developments and nervous investors. "We both know this marriage stopped working a long time ago." Claire slowly lifted her eyes. There were no tears or pleading, only sadness Ethan mistook for defeat. "I see," she answered softly. Her lack of accusation irritated him more than a scream would have. "You can keep the apartment," Ethan continued. "The financial settlement is generous. My lawyers made sure of that." Claire glanced at the thick folder between them. For years of marriage had been reduced to pages of signatures and disclosures. Outside, assistants passed, and someone laughed, as though nothing important were ending. Claire gently traced the edge of the papers with one fingertip. Then she asked only one question. "Are you absolutely certain?" Ethan frowned. "What?" She met his gaze. "Are you absolutely certain this is the decision you want to live with?" Silence settled between them. Ethan almost laughed. "You still think I'll change my mind?" His smile carried the quiet arrogance of a self-made millionaire who believed every important choice belonged to him. "I've already moved on, Claire." He didn't mention the woman waiting downstairs. He didn't need to. Everyone in the company already knew. Claire lowered her eyes again. "So have I," she whispered. Ethan barely heard the words. He pushed the proposed settlement closer. "Sign it." Instead, Claire simply closed the folder. "I won't make this harder than it already is." She stood carefully, supporting her back. The afternoon sunlight wrapped around her golden hair as she reached the conference room door. She paused with her hand on the polished steel handle. Without turning around, she spoke one final sentence. "I hope one day you understand what you've really signed away." The door clicked shut. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Dramatic until the very end. He reached for his phone. At that moment, Claire's phone vibrated 3 times. The caller ID displayed only 2 words, "Family Office." Claire answered quietly as the elevator door slid open. "Yes." A respectful voice answered. "Ms. Morgan, the family board has assembled." She closed her eyes. "I'll be there. They've been waiting for their future chairwoman." As the call ended, the elevator descended toward the lobby. Neither Ethan nor anyone inside Crawford Developments understood that the woman leaving with a small handbag and an unborn child had been called back to a family enterprise large enough to make his fortune look modest. They also did not know that Claire Morgan was the legal name she had chosen years earlier. Her birth name was Claire Ashford. Claire Morgan stepped into the marble lobby without looking back. Behind her, the revolving doors of Crawford Developments continued spinning as executives hurried in and out, unaware that the woman they had quietly judged for years had just walked away forever. Outside, a cold November breeze swept across Fifth Avenue. Black SUVs lined the curb. Businessmen rushed between meetings. Taxi horns blended with the distant wail of sirens, creating the familiar symphony of Manhattan. Claire stood perfectly still. For 4 years, she had entered this building through the front doors carrying homemade lunches, handwritten anniversary cards, and endless hope. Today, she carried a leather handbag and the child growing beneath her heart. The baby kicked gently beneath her heart. She smiled for the first time all afternoon. "We're going home," she whispered. Not to Ethan. Not anymore. For years earlier, when Ethan Crawford first met Claire Morgan, she had been standing in line at a neighborhood bookstore, wearing blue jeans, white sneakers, and a faded cream sweater. There were no designer labels, bodyguards, or luxury cars waiting outside. She had apologized after accidentally dropping one of his business magazines. He remembered laughing. She remembered thinking he seemed surprisingly kind for someone wearing a $6,000 watch. Their first coffee lasted 4 hours. Their second date lasted an entire weekend. Within a year, they were married. To everyone around them, it looked like a modern fairy tale. A rising developer and a school volunteer named Claire Morgan. Morgan was the surname of Claire's late mother, and Claire had legally adopted it at 21 so she could build an adult life outside the Ashford reputation. She never lied about her finances. Her interests in family trusts were separate property, and during the divorce both legal teams received confidential disclosures through an independent trustee. Ethan saw the trustee's name and never asked another question. Whenever he asked about her childhood, Claire said only that she had grown up comfortably and that her family valued privacy. She did not describe the island where she learned to sail or the museum-quality paintings in her father's home. Years earlier, she had told him, "If a man loves me, I want him to love Claire, not the Ashford name." Her father had answered, "Then live honestly, disclose what the law requires, and let character reveal the rest." Claire kept that promise. The first 2 years of marriage had been genuinely happy. Ethan still came home before sunset. They cooked, burned pasta, and watched old movies from the sofa while arguing over which baby names sounded ridiculous. Whenever business became stressful, Claire reminded him why he had started his company in the first place. "You wanted to build homes," she would say, "not just buildings." He used to smile whenever she said that. Back then, he still listened. Success changed him slowly, like rust beneath expensive paint. The first change came with longer office hours, then missed dinners, then forgotten anniversaries. Soon came exclusive parties Claire wasn't invited to because, according to Ethan, investors expect a different atmosphere. The excuses multiplied: business trips, emergency meetings, and late-night strategy sessions. Claire believed him until silence exposed what excuses could not. He no longer asked how she felt. He no longer noticed her pregnancy cravings. He didn't hear her crying in the nursery after another doctor's appointment. He barely looked up from his phone when she showed him the ultrasound picture of their daughter, sucking her thumb. "That's nice," he had murmured without lifting his eyes from the screen. Claire folded the photograph back into its envelope before he could see the tears she refused to let fall. The distance between them hadn't arrived all at once. It had grown one ignored conversation, one canceled promise, and one lonely night at a time. And somewhere along the way, Ethan Crawford convinced himself that the quiet woman waiting for him at home would always be there. He never imagined that the day she finally walked away, the entire foundation beneath his carefully built empire would begin to crack. The rain began just as Claire stepped out of the building. Thin at first, then steady. Cold drops landed on the marble steps, turning the polished stone into a mirror that reflected the Manhattan skyline in broken fragments. She didn't open the umbrella tucked inside her handbag. She barely noticed the rain at all. Inside her purse rested the unsigned marital settlement. Ethan had signed, but the marriage would remain intact until a judge entered a divorce judgment. 40 minutes later, Claire unlocked the front door of the penthouse overlooking Central Park. The silence greeted her before the lights did. It used to feel peaceful here. Tonight, it felt like a museum. Every room carried memories. The white grand piano Ethan had promised to learn. The nursery they painted together one Sunday afternoon. A framed sonogram resting on the fireplace mantel. Claire walked toward it instinctively. Her fingers traced the tiny black and white image. Their daughter, 28 weeks old, perfectly healthy. She remembered the day of the appointment. The doctor had smiled. "She has your eyes." Claire had laughed through happy tears. Ethan had answered a phone call before the examination even ended. "I have an investor waiting." He left before hearing the heartbeat. At the time, she convinced herself business came first. Now she understood something much more painful. She had simply stopped coming first. Her phone vibrated again. Family office. Claire looked at the screen for several seconds before answering. Claire. The familiar voice belonged to Arthur Bennett, her father's oldest advisor. He had known her since the day she was born. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Did he sign?" Claire closed her eyes. "Yes." Arthur remained silent. He understood what that single word truly meant. Your father has been informed. Claire leaned against the window, overlooking the rain-soaked park. How did he take it? A long pause. The same way mountains receive storms. No anger. No raised voice. Only stillness. Arthur continued quietly. He canceled tomorrow's meetings in Zurich. There is also a business matter. One Ashford-managed credit fund has a conditional commitment to Crawford developments. Because the family succession is changing, compliance has opened its standard review. Claire looked toward the city skyline. I will not participate in that review. You won't, Arthur assured her. The independent committee will examine the same leverage, cash flow, and governance information it would examine for any borrower. I don't want Ethan punished for leaving me. Then he won't be. If his company qualifies, the committee can proceed. If it does not, the reason will be in the numbers, not in your marriage. That answer mattered to Claire. Power without boundaries was merely revenge wearing an expensive suit. She wanted no part of it. Across town, Ethan Crawford stood inside the private lounge of the Aurora Club. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished oak floors. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Investors laughed over 18-year-old whiskey. Across from Ethan sat Vanessa Langford. Elegant, confident. The woman everyone assumed would soon become Mrs. Crawford. She raised her champagne glass. Congratulations. Ethan smirked. On what? Your freedom. Their glasses touched. A sharp metallic chime. He smiled for the cameras as photographers captured another successful millionaire celebrating another successful chapter. Yet something felt wrong for reasons he could not explain. His phone remained unusually quiet. There were no messages, emotional voicemails, or desperate apologies from Claire. Vanessa noticed him glancing toward the screen. Expecting someone? No. But the answer came too quickly. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. I guess she's finally accepted reality. Reality. The word lingered in the air. At almost that exact moment, the Independent Credit Committee at Ashford Capital sent Crawford Developments a routine request for updated debt schedules, cash flow assumptions, and board minutes. No one contacted competing banks. No one asked another investor to withdraw. The review concerned only Ashford Capital's own proposed commitment. Ethan laughed as another investor told a joke, unaware that the numbers he had dismissed for months were about to receive serious scrutiny. And somewhere above the clouds, aboard a private Gulf stream crossing the Atlantic, one man quietly closed a leather folder bearing the Ashford family crest. Claire's father looked out the window for a long time before speaking just 5 words. Bring my daughter back home. The elevator doors opened without a sound. Claire stepped into the underground parking garage where she had parked the same silver sedan for nearly 4 years. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't rare. Ethan used to joke that it looked out of place beside the rows of Bentleys and Ferraris belonging to his executives. She had only smiled. He never knew she could have replaced every car in the garage without checking her bank balance. She reached into her handbag for the keys, then stopped. Her parking space was empty. For a brief moment, she wondered if it had been stolen. A second later, headlights appeared at the far end of the garage. 3 black SUVs rolled forward and stopped a few feet away. Security officers stepped out with practiced efficiency, scanning the garage before the lead officer approached. The lead security officer walked toward Claire before respectfully lowering his head. Ms. Morgan, we are ready. Claire released a quiet breath. You came sooner than I expected. We were instructed not to leave you alone after today's events. The rear door of the center vehicle opened automatically. Inside waited warm lighting, fresh flowers, bottled water, and a folded cashmere blanket. The details were almost embarrassingly familiar. Her father always remembered she became cold after stressful days. Claire looked back once toward the skyscraper rising above the garage. 38 floors above, Ethan was probably finishing another business dinner. He still believed she had left in an ordinary sedan. He had no idea a private family security team had been waiting nearby. Without another word, Claire entered the vehicle. The convoy pulled away. As Manhattan disappeared behind tinted glass, the atmosphere inside the SUV remained almost completely silent. The only sound came from rain tapping gently against reinforced windows. Across from Claire sat Arthur Bennett, gray-haired and perfectly composed. His expression revealed little, yet his eyes softened the moment he saw her wedding ring. You kept it on. Claire glanced at her left hand. For today. Arthur nodded. Your father hoped you would choose for yourself. I have. She slowly removed the ring. The diamond caught one final beam of fading sunlight before she placed it inside a small velvet pouch. Arthur accepted it without speaking. Some endings deserved silence. The convoy crossed the East River. Instead of heading toward any airport terminal, the vehicles entered a heavily secured private aviation facility closed to the public. There were no logos, only discreet security. Ground personnel were already waiting beneath umbrellas. Far beyond the hangars stood a white Gulfstream aircraft bearing no company markings. Only a small silver crest near the entrance. It showed an ash tree enclosed inside a circle, the Ashford family emblem. Claire had grown up seeing it on stationery, cufflinks, antique books, and private aircraft. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to belong to that world. As she stepped onto the rain-darkened runway, every member of the ground crew straightened immediately. They did so from respect, not fear. One employee quietly spoke into an earpiece. "Ms. Morgan has arrived." The aircraft door opened. A flight attendant smiled warmly. "Welcome back, Miss Ashford." Back. The word struck harder than she expected. For years she had believed home was wherever Ethan stood. Now she realized home had been waiting for her all along. Thousands of miles away, above the Atlantic Ocean, another Gulfstream continued its westbound flight. Inside its private cabin sat Jonathan Ashford. He was 71, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed. His calm presence filled the room more completely than any speech ever could. The financial reports on the table remained unopened. His attention rested on a single photograph. Claire at 8 years old, smiling while holding his hand on a beach at sunset. A soft knock interrupted the silence. "Sir." Jonathan looked up. "Yes." "The convoy has secured Miss Ashford." He closed his eyes briefly. "Is she hurt?" "No, sir." "And the baby?" "Healthy." Only then did he release the breath he had been holding since receiving Arthur's phone call. After several quiet seconds, he asked one final question. "Did she cry?" The aide lowered his gaze. "No." Jonathan nodded almost imperceptibly. "That worries me more." He carefully returned the childhood photograph to its leather case before looking out at the endless ocean below. His voice remained calm, almost gentle, yet everyone in the cabin understood the weight behind it. "Tell the family office that Claire is coming home." Nothing more. No retaliation, no calls to lenders, and no decisions made on her behalf. Monday morning arrived with flawless blue skies. Nothing about the sunrise suggested that an empire had already begun to shift beneath the surface. The trading floors opened. Markets stirred awake. Coffee machines hummed across Manhattan. And inside the headquarters of Crawford Developments, Ethan Crawford walked into the executive boardroom, believing he was about to approve another record-breaking quarter. He loosened his tie, accepted congratulations from employees, returned confident smiles. The settlement was signed on his side, and he treated the marriage as already finished. His future, he believed, had never looked brighter. Until his chief financial officer entered 10 minutes late. Daniel Mercer had worked beside Ethan for nearly a decade. He was never late, never flustered, never pale. Today, he looked like he hadn't slept. "Ethan." Daniel placed a stack of reports onto the conference table. "We have a problem." Ethan barely looked up. "If it's another permitting delay, let legal handle it." "It's not permits." Daniel hesitated. "It's funding." That single word changed the room. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan finally reached for the reports. Ashford Capital, the private credit fund expected to anchor Crawford's next expansion, had postponed its final vote and requested updated debt schedules. A longtime commercial bank had separately asked for revised cash flow projections before renewing a credit line. Neither institution had rejected Crawford, but both had found the same weakness. The company depended too heavily on one major project while carrying more short-term debt than Daniel had recommended. "That's impossible," Ethan said. "We've never missed a payment." "Past payments are not the only issue," Daniel replied. "Our debt service coverage has fallen, and the harbor project is 3 months behind." Before Ethan could answer, an assistant entered with a tablet. Their Singapore partner had postponed a signing until financing was confirmed. This was not choreography. It was a chain reaction created by ordinary risk. When the anchor financing became uncertain, every dependent agreement required another look. Across the Atlantic, the Ashford estate remained remarkably peaceful. Claire sat in the conservatory overlooking the ocean. Morning sunlight poured through the glass ceiling while waves rolled quietly against the cliffs below. She was reading a children's storybook, not a financial report, not the market summaries Arthur had left outside her door. A tiny smile crossed her face as she imagined reading the same book to her daughter one day. Arthur entered softly. The updates have arrived. Claire didn't look up. I don't want them. They concern Ethan. She closed the book. I asked Father not to interfere. Arthur nodded. He hasn't. He placed a sealed envelope on the table. The independent committee documented 3 concerns: debt concentration, delayed construction, and weak board oversight. Your father has not contacted the committee, and you have been formally recused. Claire studied him. So this would have happened even if Ethan and I were still married? Yes. The review was triggered by the size of the proposed loan and the latest project reports. That answer gave her no satisfaction, but it gave her peace. Consequences were arriving through numbers Ethan had chosen to ignore, not through an Ashford command. Back in Manhattan, Ethan stood alone inside his corner office. The skyline looked exactly as it had 3 days earlier. Yet somehow, everything felt different. His phone rang. It was the chairman of one of his oldest lending partners. Finally, Ethan, the older man said warmly. I wanted to call personally. Ethan relaxed. I appreciate that. A pause followed, long enough to become uncomfortable. We value our relationship, but our board has decided to delay expansion financing for the time being. For how long? I'm afraid I don't know. There has to be a reason. Another silence followed. Then the chairman answered carefully. Your company is not being punished, Ethan. Our board is looking at leverage, project delays, and the absence of independent directors. Fix those issues and we can talk again. The line disconnected. Ethan lowered the phone. For the first time in years, he was not facing an invisible enemy. He was facing the results of decisions he had defended because success once made them look harmless. Hundreds of miles away, Claire folded a baby blanket, unaware that Ethan's business was finally being measured without the protection of his reputation. By Friday morning, the financing delay had spread through every agreement that depended on it. A European acquisition partner suspended negotiations until Crawford reduced its debt. The Singapore project moved its signing date. A pension investor requested stronger governance protections. None of the institutions had coordinated with one another. Each was responding to the same public facts and the uncertainty surrounding the anchor loan. Find me a way through this, Ethan told his leadership team. Daniel Mercer pushed a report across the table. We need to slow expansion, add independent directors, and renegotiate short-term debt. Ethan disliked every recommendation because Claire had offered similar advice years earlier. He had called her cautious then. Now the market called the same caution responsible. That afternoon, Ethan accepted an invitation to the Global Capital Leadership Summit. It was one of the most exclusive economic conferences in the world. Heads of investment funds, central bank advisors, technology founders, industrial magnates. Every major decision-maker gathered beneath one roof. Normally, Ethan enjoyed these events. His company had been invited 3 years in a row. He expected the summit to answer the question no one else would. What had he failed to understand about his own company? The Grand Meridian Convention Center sparkled beneath thousands of crystal lights. Television crews lined the entrance. Luxury sedans arrived one after another. Every guest wore confidence like a tailored suit. Ethan adjusted his tie before stepping onto the red carpet. Several reporters recognized him. Mr. Crawford, do you expect another expansion announcement today? He smiled automatically. We're optimistic about the future. The cameras flashed. He almost believed his own words. Inside the main ballroom, nearly 2,000 guests filled the enormous hall. A giant screen displayed the opening program. One line immediately caught everyone's attention. Special keynote announcement. The audience exchanged curious looks. The speaker's identity had been kept secret until the final moment. Even veteran investors whispered among themselves. Who could possibly require this much secrecy? Then the lights dimmed. Soft orchestral music replaced the conversations. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice echoed across the silent ballroom. Today, we have the honor of welcoming someone whose family has shaped global investment for generations. Ethan frowned. He couldn't remember seeing that name on the schedule. The presenter continued. For decades, They preferred influence over publicity. A massive screen behind him illuminated with a silver crest. An ash tree enclosed inside a perfect circle. Some guests immediately stood. Others gasped. Several older financiers exchanged knowing glances. One whispered almost reverently, "The Ashfords." Ethan had never heard the name, but the reaction around him made his stomach tighten. The presenter smiled. "Please welcome the future chairwoman of Ashford Global Holdings, Claire Ashford, known in private life for years as Clare Morgan." The spotlight turned toward the entrance. The ballroom rose to its feet. Not politely, instantly, like a single wave sweeping through the room. Ethan turned with everyone else. His heartbeat slowed, then stopped. A familiar figure appeared beneath the lights. Elegant, composed, dressed in an ivory maternity gown beneath a tailored cream coat. Golden hair resting softly across her shoulders. One hand gently cradling the life growing beneath her heart. Claire, his wife. The woman who had quietly walked out of his office only days before. For one endless moment, the entire world disappeared. The applause thundered through the ballroom. World leaders, founders, and veteran investors remained standing. Not for Jonathan Ashford. Not for the family fortune. For Claire. She acknowledged the audience with a graceful nod before walking calmly toward the stage. No arrogance. No triumph. Only quiet dignity. Ethan felt the color drain from his face. His mind searched desperately for an explanation. There wasn't one. Only memories. He remembered every simple dinner, every practical choice, and every moment he had mistaken humility for insignificance. Then the master of ceremonies spoke one final sentence. The sentence that shattered everything Ethan believed he knew. "Please welcome the sole heir to the Ashford legacy, the woman who will soon oversee a major privately held investment group." The applause grew even louder. And for the first time since signing the proposed settlement, Ethan Crawford understood that he had never truly known the woman he chose to lose. The applause continued because the room understood the responsibility Claire was accepting. Ethan remained frozen beside his table. His pulse thundered in his ears. Around him, veteran executives exchanged respectful nods. One elderly investor whispered, "The Ashfords do not chase opportunities. They create them." None of it made sense to Ethan. Claire, the woman who insisted on clipping grocery coupons and baking birthday cakes herself, was somehow the heir to a financial dynasty powerful enough to make billionaires stand before she even spoke. Claire adjusted the microphone. The ballroom fell completely silent. "Thank you." Her voice was calm, gentle. It was the same voice that had once asked if he wanted dinner. "I've spent most of my adult life believing that a person's value should never depend on a family name." She paused. "So I chose to live without mine." There was no boasting or attempt to impress, only honesty. "My father taught me that wealth is easiest to measure." A faint smile appeared. "But character takes much longer." Jonathan Ashford watched from the front row with unmistakable pride. Claire continued, "The greatest investments are not buildings or companies." She rested one hand gently against her unborn daughter. "They are the people who trust us with their future." The audience applauded, and Ethan lowered his eyes. Suddenly he remembered every promise he had failed to keep. He remembered every dinner he had skipped, every medical appointment he had missed, and every kindness he had answered with indifference. He had spent years searching for value while overlooking the person beside him. An hour later, guests gathered in the reception hall while journalists and investment leaders waited to speak with the Ashfords. Ethan stood alone across the room. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I'm going to speak to her." No one stopped him. As he crossed the marble floor, conversations seemed to fade around him. Claire noticed him approaching before he reached her. She politely excused herself from the executives surrounding her. For the first time since the settlement meeting, they stood face to face. They stood a few feet apart, and neither spoke immediately. Ethan expected anger, but found only peace. "I didn't know." His voice barely rose above a whisper. Claire nodded softly. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him for several quiet seconds. "Because I wanted someone to love Clare Morgan before they knew she was Claire Ashford." The words landed harder than an accusation. "I made a terrible mistake." Claire didn't argue. The truth already stood between them. He stepped a little closer. "I can fix this." Sadness crossed her face. "No, Ethan. You haven't even heard what I'm going to say." "I don't have to." He reached toward her instinctively, then stopped. Claire looked at the empty place where her wedding ring had rested. Ethan understood that the ring was gone because Claire had accepted the choice he made. She reached into her handbag and removed the cream-colored folder. The marital settlement now carried both signatures. Beside it was a letter from her attorney confirming that the uncontested divorce petition would be filed the next morning. A judge, not either spouse, would decide when the marriage legally ended. Claire also handed him a second document. This is a proposed parenting framework. It is not a court order, and our daughter has not been born yet. Our lawyers can revise it after her birth, but it begins with one promise. She will know both parents, and neither of us will use her to punish the other. Ethan stared at the pages. You're still giving me a place in her life? I am recognizing that she has a father, Claire replied. What that relationship becomes will depend on your consistency, not your regret. You asked me whether I was certain, she continued. I am certain now. She returned to the reception, leaving Ethan with documents that did not erase him from his daughter's future, but required him to become worthy of it. For the first time in his life, he understood that some fortunes could not be measured in money, and some choices could be repaired only through years of honest action. About 2 months later, dawn spread pale gold across the Atlantic as Claire gave birth to a healthy daughter. The child arrived at 39 weeks, after a pregnancy monitored carefully and without the impossible time jump that had once existed only in careless retellings. Claire named her Lily and Morgan Ashford, honoring both the quiet life she had chosen and the family history she no longer needed to hide. Jonathan Ashford stood near the hospital window with tears in his eyes. In the boardroom, he could discuss billions without changing expression. Holding his granddaughter, he became simply a father watching his daughter begin again. The divorce judgment had been entered 3 weeks earlier after the judge reviewed the settlement and confirmed that both spouses had signed voluntarily. Because Lily had not yet been born when the case was filed, Claire and Ethan's attorneys had waited to submit a final parenting agreement. Now they presented the court with a plan covering legal decision-making, parenting time, financial support, medical information, travel, and a promise that neither parent would speak badly about the other in Lily's presence. Ethan arrived at the hospital only after Claire sent permission through her attorney. He carried no flowers, jewelry, or cameras. He brought a small knitted blanket and an apology he no longer expected to be rewarded for. May I meet her? He asked from the doorway. Claire studied him, then nodded. You may meet your daughter. When Lily settled against his chest, Ethan's practiced confidence disappeared. He cried quietly, careful not to wake her. Hello, he whispered. I should have been ready for you sooner. Claire did not offer reconciliation. She offered something more demanding, responsibility. Be present when no one is watching, she told him. That is how she will learn who you are. The Ashford Investment Committee ultimately declined Crawford's expansion loan, citing debt concentration and project delays in a written decision reviewed by outside counsel. The committee also stated that Claire had been recused from every discussion. No one destroyed Ethan's company. He reduced expansion, sold an unnecessary tower project, appointed 2 independent directors, and rebuilt his balance sheet. Vanessa disappeared when the cameras and celebrations did, but Ethan no longer blamed her for choices he had made himself. Over the next 2 years, he followed the parenting order consistently. He attended pediatric appointments when invited, paid support on time, learned Lily's routines, and reserved every Wednesday afternoon and alternating weekends for her. When business emergencies arose, he delegated them. The first time he turned off his phone during Lily's birthday party, Daniel Mercer smiled and said, You finally understand what cannot be rescheduled. Claire became chairwoman of Ashford Global Holdings and used the role to expand housing partnerships, maternal health grants, and financial counseling for families facing separation. She did not build those programs to make herself look generous. She built them because dignity was easier to preserve when people had practical support. One autumn afternoon, Claire and Ethan met in Central Park for Lily's handoff. Their daughter ran between them carrying a red leaf in each fist. Ethan knelt to zip her coat, while Claire checked the small backpack holding her medicine and favorite book. They spoke calmly about preschool, sleep schedules, and the following week's appointment. There was no romance left between them, but there was respect. Ethan had not won Claire back. He had earned the chance to become a dependable father. As he walked away with Lily's hand in his, Claire watched for a moment before turning toward her own path. Money could build towers, and influence could open doors, but neither could restore trust on demand. Trust returned, when it returned at all, through ordinary promises kept repeatedly. That was the lesson Ethan carried forward, and the inheritance Claire intended to give her daughter long before Lily inherited anything else.